Your book mentions, though, that Saba or Ethiopia declined, possibly because this area was drying up. Again, big desert, and this area was cut off from any water supply, and was to remain so from that time to this. Yeah, your book mentions King Solomon, again, look at page 216. King Solomon, the Queen of Sheba. Eventually, your Ethiopian rulers adopted Christianity and remained Christian until 1974 when it became communist. The Ethiopians were one of the few nations here that were able to resist Islam. And, well, one reason, folk, is Islam does not fight very well where there's a whole lot of mountains and rough terrain. Also, the Ethiopians simply were not very well conquered from outside because any army that went into Ethiopia was going to be hard beset by a whole lot of venomous snakes. And don't ask me why the venomous snakes never or rarely bit the Ethiopians. Maybe the Ethiopians developed an eye for them and could spot them and avoid them. But an invading army, and as recently as the 1890s, Italy invaded Ethiopia, and Italy lost. Well, it was terribly embarrassing for the Italians to be beaten by what they thought was a primitive country. But then, in 1936, Italy came back with planes and tanks that Ethiopia didn't have. And this time, with thanks to trucks and planes and tanks, machine guns and bombs and other stuff like that, Italy was able to temporarily conquer Ethiopia. When World War II ended, Italy, having lost the war, had to give it all back. Why was Italy interested in Ethiopia? Again, folk, this is a little bit of alternate history, but I'll throw it in for good measure because several persons and I have talked about it. I mean, I've discussed even perfect strangers. A lot of persons believe that the Ark of the Covenant that's been lost was taken to Ethiopia. Have any of you heard this from other sources? At least one head is nodding. One head. Yes?
What did you ask?
The Ark of the Covenant is believed to have been stolen by King Solomon's son Menelik and taken to Ethiopia.
Isn't that what all the, well, I mean, you might know, isn't that how all the Indiana Jones movies got started?
Yeah,
As well as the Captain America comic series?
Yeah, that's what they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. I'm glad you mentioned it, yes. The Ark, of course, has not been found. We do know that in Ethiopia are the only known descendants of the Jewish Levitical priesthood. At least some people in Ethiopia claim that they can trace it, at least by word of mouth, that they are descended from the Israeli priesthood. Whether the Ark is there or not, that's sheer speculation. Don't worry about the word Coptic. I'm not going to go into that. All right. There is another mention of a group of people called the Garamantes on page 216. Don't worry about them, they won't be on a test, but I'm going to mention them because it appears that they were a really powerful civilization that were able to trade with Rome, and as Rome fell, they fell. And it's believed that they actually had an underground water system, pipes of a sort, that went to the desert, and their traders could follow these pipes and every once in a while drill down the pipe and pull up water and drink along the way. Otherwise, they would have died of thirst in the desert. But your book mentions civilizations just simply do not do very well in the desert. And when Rome declined and trade fell off, and one reason trade fell off in Rome was they started feeding all their idle poor people. When trade fell off, this kingdom fell off also and was forgotten about until very recent times. East Africa, land of the Bantu. The Bantu is a family of languages you find in Africa that indicates that these people are of common origin. They began to migrate eastward and settled down and based their economy on subsistence farming. That is, a tribe would farm just enough to feed itself and no more. then in other words, trade would fall off. Now, it is known that Egyptian ships from way back came down the Red Sea and came to this part of Africa in search for gold. Apparently they found some. And they would carry the gold back to Africa. And also I have a book in my house that says that the Egyptians got the rocks they used to build the pyramids from down here. Now some of the rocks came from right here near where the pyramid's built, but some of the heavy, really heavy granite rocks came from way down in Africa. And we have no idea how they transported them to the site to Egypt. Anyway, as the Sahara Desert dried up, the people and the animals living there all had to leave, and they scattered. Apparently some of them went back to Europe, and some of them went on deeper into Africa. And the Sahara became more and more sparsely inhabited as time went on, and the Sahara Desert grows at a fast rate of about 20 or 30 miles every year. But the people, as they left behind art. Your book shows an example of rock paintings that indicates that the Sahara people were farmers and good artists for all that. Apparently what we might call civilized. Some people came to Africa from the Malay Peninsula, pretty far away, and migrated, and they mixed in. Particularly, some of them came to this island of Madagascar here. Now, why would they be interested in Africa? It's simply this. Of course, Africa has minerals, but Africa is the one place in the world that for 6 months of the year the winds blow east, then the other 6 months the winds blow west. And a ship captain can know when the wind is blowing and set his sail for the east when the wind is blowing east, get to his destination, offload his wares, pick up the other wares from where he's buying from, turn his ship around, and pick up the winds heading west and head west with him. And this created a whole lot of trade between Africa and the Far East, including China and India and Indonesia. And a lot of people from here wound up settling in Madagascar. And today Madagascar is half African and half Malaysian. All right, into this scenario, Islam came, but African religion, before Islam came. Essentially, your book sums it up in the word pantheism. I'm going to add a little bit to that, but pantheism in effect says that all of nature is God. The river is God, the trees are God, the animals are God, the sun and the moon is God. And when they have to kill an animal, they'll perform a ceremony called an apology. They say, we only kill you because we have to. But all of nature is God. That's what the word pan means. All is God. Pantheism means theism, pan, all, everything is God. Along similar lines, there's animism, that the spirits, gods reside in everything, very, very much related. And also, there's a group of people in the priests called shamans. Now, these religions are oftentimes associated with primitive peoples, and you can't help but wonder, do these religions bring on primitivism? Now, in the case of the shamans, they're like the priestly mediators. They're the go-betweens between God and man. Now, something I have not mentioned about Islam till now, but it's really, really very important. Islam does not believe in priests or priestly mediators. In Islam, everybody goes directly to Allah without going through a mediator. Some Christians believe this also. Some Christians, though, believe that you have to have priestly mediation. The word priest means a mediator between God and man. Now, your shaman. They've sometimes been called witch doctors or witchmen. They will go into a trance-like state to get answers to questions like a disease hits them. They'll try to get cures for the disease. And usually cures consist of finding the right kind of herb and giving their patients the right kind of herb. Now, I want to say this. Western medicine will admit that in some cases, some of the cures that shamans use do in fact work. I'm not saying it's all a bunch of hocus pocus or a bunch of malarkey. In some cases, they have been found to be useful. But like any other medicine, the shamans admit that their abilities are limited. There are certain types of ailments that they cannot heal. Of course, that's the same with all other medicines. All right. Also, the African people tended to worship their ancestors, and they would learn the names of their ancestors by rote memory. In other words, the father would tell his children, my father was such and such, and his father, and they would memorize the names of their ancestors back for many generations. And not only did they memorize their ancestors, but they would memorize what each ancestor supposedly did. And so we could think, well, we could construct history from this, except for one thing. The problem with passing things down the line is somewhere along the line, someone gets the story and dies before he can pass it on. Or, as in the case of slaves, a lot of Africans were taken out of Africa and made slaves of. And some of them knew the stories, and they were taken out before they could pass it on. So the stories remain somewhat broken. And but there have been persons who have gone into Africa and say, hey, who can tell me the names of your ancestors? And they were trying to construct a history from these traditions that are handed down. But it's difficult because some traditions strongly contradict the other. But the Africans worshipped their ancestors, worshipped the spirits, worshipped nature. All right, you have to understand this before Islam arrived. Islam was able to conquer North Africa, which had largely been Christianized anyway. Now, a lot of Christian people from the first time that Islam conquered quickly packed up and moved out, sailed across the Mediterranean into Europe and moved out. One traveler said, I used to travel in North Africa and I could see lots of people along the way. Now I can go for a couple of days and never meet anyone. But of course, part of the reason too was the Sahara Desert kept expanding northward. But Islam conquered the area of North Africa, which was a largely dry, open place devoid of trees. And then when they got down to the region of the jungles and the grasslands, the savannas, the mountains, they did not get far. And part of the reason was certain things about African traditions simply conflicted too hard with Islam. Number one, Islam said there are no priestly mediators. The Africans said, oh yes, there are. We believe there are priestly mediators. But another reason is that Africans had a tradition that the women were equal to the men, or nearly equal, and they did not expect women to be subservient. Islam said, no, women are property and are to be controlled and owned by men. And again, this brought Islam into conflict with Africans also. Again, I can't emphasize enough how that Islam seems to run into problems every time it runs into terrain, and it's not like the terrain that they started out in Arabia. And they just simply have not made much headway where there's a lot of jungles, a lot of grasslands, a lot of mountains, a lot of trees. They simply have not made a whole lot of headway in places like that. Spirit worship, again, Islam did not believe in it, Africans did. All this, oh yes, polygamy was an issue. Islam said a man can only have one wife. A man could have no more than 4 wives. African men often had 5 or 6 wives. And Islam said that a woman could only have one husband. A lot of African women had more than one husband. Again, all this made it difficult for Islam to penetrate into sub-Saharan Africa. You know, Islam was there, made its presence felt, but they did not take over and dominate and rule this area of sub-Saharan Africa. And again, the reasons are African thoughts patterns and Islamic thought patterns were too different for them to come to any common ground.